The rain had not yet left Cookeville, Tennessee, that September night in 2011. The streets glistened under tired yellow lamps, their reflections fractured on the wet asphalt like shards of broken glass. At the Jefferson Avenue diner, the final customers were long gone. Inside, a young waitress untied her apron, folded it neatly into her canvas backpack, and offered her coworkers a tired smile. Her name was Emily Grace Walker, 19 years old, a freshman at Tennessee Tech, and, as her friends would later say, a light too bright for the quiet town. At 10:45 p.m., she stepped out into the drizzle, tugging her thin jacket tighter as the autumn wind pressed cold against her skin. The diner clock ticked softly inside as the door swung shut behind her. 5 minutes later, under the dim glow of a streetlight, she was seen for the last time. Emily stood beside a green Ford pickup, its mud-caked body hulking in the rain. A man leaned from the driver's side, saying something lost in the hiss of water striking pavement. Emily's posture was tense, her arms folded, her damp hair clinging to her face. Imagine walking out alone, rain dripping from your jacket, only to see a truck idling in the shadows. Would you notice the danger? Would you recognize the moment your life was about to change? At 11:15, her phone gave its final signal along I-40, then went silent forever. The girl vanished, leaving behind a locked car, an untouched room, and a town about to descend into 10 years of torment. This is not just a disappearance, it is a wound carved deep into a community's memory. Stay with us, because tonight we're opening one of Tennessee's darkest cold case files. The morning after Emily Grace Walker vanished, Cookeville woke under skies still soaked with rain. The drizzle that had lingered through the night left the sidewalks damp, the trees dripping steadily as if mourning with the town. On Maple Street, inside a modest brick home, Linda Walker rose from her bed with a heaviness she couldn't explain. Normally, Emily would have texted after her shift, a short message, home safe, love you, before crawling into bed. But this time, her phone was silent, the bed untouched, blankets smooth as if they'd been waiting all night for someone who never returned. Linda dialed her daughter's number again. The long ring bled into voicemail, Emily's recorded voice chirping a cheerful, "Hey, it's Emmy!" That cracked Linda's composure. Her instincts screamed. Something was wrong. At 7:00 a.m., she picked up the landline and called the Putnam County Sheriff's Office. "My daughter didn't come home. She's never done this before," she said, her voice trembling. Deputy Sheriff Robert Hayes, a veteran with nearly 3 decades on the force, took the call. By 7:30, he was at Linda's doorstep, jotting down every detail. He walked through Emily's tidy room, desk organized, laptop in sleep mode, passport, credit cards, and wallet still on the table. Nothing suggested she'd left voluntarily. Hayes muttered, almost to himself, "Doesn't look like she ran away." 8:00, driving to the Jefferson Avenue diner, Hayes noted the drizzle had eased, though the air still smelled of wet asphalt. In the lot behind the diner, his eyes froze. Parked neatly in its usual space sat a silver Honda Civic. Emily's car. Locked. No broken glass. No signs of tampering. Just there, waiting. If you found your daughter's car untouched, the keys still on her ring, would you believe she simply walked away? Or would you feel the creeping dread that something far worse had happened in the shadows? Hayes requested the diner's security footage immediately. The camera was old, its lens clouded by rain, but it showed Emily leaving at 10:50 p.m., crossing toward the parking lot. Moments later, the headlights of a green Ford pickup flared across the screen, and then both figures vanished into darkness. Witnesses began to fill in the gaps. George Allen, a diner regular, told Hayes. I was passing by and saw her standing near that truck. She looked tense, arms crossed, shaking her head. Didn't seem like a friendly chat. His words carried weight, painting Emily not as a runaway but as a girl caught in a confrontation. Hayes knew time was critical. By noon, the sheriff's office had mobilized a small search party within a 5-mile radius of the diner and Center Hill Lake. K-9 units sniffed Emily's jacket pulled from her closet. German shepherds lowered their noses to the damp ground, leading officers toward thickets near the parking lot, then losing the scent as rain diluted the trail. The sound of barking mixed with shouts of Emily's name echoed off the nearby trees. At Tennessee Tech, word spread like wildfire. By the afternoon, dorm bulletin boards were plastered with hastily printed flyers. Emily's round face, bright blue eyes, and a smile captured at her high school graduation. Students who had never met her felt a kinship. She was one of them, a classmate, a neighbor, a piece of the small-town fabric. Within hours, flyers covered the campus library, bars, laundromats, and church doors. The Walker home filled with relatives, friends, and neighbors. Linda sat on the couch, her hands trembling around a photo of Emily in cap and gown. On the table beside her, a coffee mug grew cold, forgotten. Every time the phone rang, she jumped. Each silence afterward deepened her dread. By evening, the search widened. Volunteers fanned out in lines, combing fields and woods, flashlights cutting beams through the mist. Parents gripped their children's hands tightly, all of them imagining Linda's fear. Patrol cars rolled slowly down back roads, their red and blue lights flashing over dripping branches. Around 11, E0P M. A taxi driver came forward. His name was Harold Dixon. He told deputies that while driving a fare out of town the previous night, he had seen a green Ford pickup speeding recklessly toward Center Hill Lake. Rain was coming down hard, roads slick, but that truck barreled like it was running from something, Dixon said. His account sent a chill through the investigation. The timing matched Emily's last phone ping, 11:15 p.m. A tower along I-40 near the lake. The discovery of her locked Civic in the diner's lot took on even greater weight. If her only means of transportation remained untouched, how had she ended up miles away near the lake? And in whose truck? The sheriff's office knew what it meant. This wasn't a case of a college freshman sneaking off. This was abduction. The next morning, police established a command post near Tennessee Tech. Maps were tacked to bulletin boards, red pins marking search zones. Radios crackled nonstop, reports flooding in. Negative on the north side. K-9 lost scent near the highway. Volunteers sweeping the eastern trail. 8s, inside the Walker home. Linda clutched Emily's cat, which refused to leave her bed. Family photos lined the walls, each image now a reminder of absence. Linda whispered prayers, her voice hoarse. Please let her be safe. 8s. For Hayes, every minute stretched like a taut wire. He rewatched the grainy footage over and over, replaying the moment Emily disappeared into the night. The glow of the pickup headlights, the tense stance, the way the rain swallowed her figure. He scribbled in his notebook, "Green Ford pickup. Who drives it? Who saw it?" 8s. By late evening, volunteers found faint tire tracks etched into soft soil near the forest edge along a road toward the lake. The rain had blurred most details, but the curb suggested a vehicle veered off-road, looped back, then vanished. Officers marked the site with wooden stakes and yellow tape. For the first time, a tangible clue tied to Emily's final moments lay before them. The scene was silent, except for the drip of rain from the leaves. Flashlight beams trembled across the mud, illuminating the fragile tracks. A deputy whispered, "This could be it." Eights. But as night fell, hope wavered. The lake swallowed sounds in its vast stillness. Volunteers slumped by campfires at the rendezvous point, exhausted but unwilling to quit. Parents stared into the dark woods, imagining what might lie beyond. Linda, sitting in the command post, kept asking officers the same question. "Have you found her yet?" Each time, the answer was no. The realization grew heavier. The case was no longer just a missing persons report. It was rapidly becoming a nightmare of abduction, of a girl pulled into shadows by an unknown hand. And in Cookeville, whispers began. At coffee shops, students exchanged theories. In church pews, mothers pulled their children closer. The phrase spread, "The girl who vanished by the green truck." Eights. The town was unsettled, frightened, but united. Emily wasn't just a freshman. She was Cookeville's daughter. And now, her absence left a hollow in every corner of the community. If this already chills you, subscribe to keep uncovering these cold case files with us, because what follows isn't just a search. It's the unraveling of one of Tennessee's most haunting mysteries. The days that followed Emily Grace Walker's disappearance transformed Cookeville from a quiet college town into the epicenter of an unrelenting search. By the second morning, the sheriff's office resembled a war room. Maps covered the walls, dotted with pins that mark search zones stretching from the Jefferson Avenue diner to the sprawling woods around Center Hill Lake. Radios crackled with constant chatter, and officers in muddy boots strode in and out, their faces lined with exhaustion. In the heart of this chaos, one thing stood out: the unity of the community. Tennessee Tech students skipped classes, choosing instead to staple flyers to telephone poles, library corkboards, and grocery store entrances. The words, "Missing Emily Grace Walker, 19, screamed in bold black letters beneath her smiling photo. Parents walked the streets handing out copies to strangers. Churches opened their doors to host vigils. Businesses donated food and bottled water to volunteers. For a moment, the town forgot its daily worries, exams, bills, deadlines, and turned entirely toward bringing Emily home. Linda Walker, though shattered by fear, found herself at the center of this movement. Her living room became a makeshift command post, with relatives folding stacks of flyers, neighbors dropping off casseroles, and pastors stopping by to pray. Yet every time she glanced at Emily's untouched bed, grief punched her anew. She clung to hope with trembling hands, whispering to herself that her daughter was somewhere waiting to be found. By the third night, search parties numbered in the hundreds. Flashlight beams swept across fields, wooded paths, and the muddy banks of Center Hill Lake. K-9 units strained against leashes, their noses pressed to the damp ground. The scene was both inspiring and eerie, a sea of determined faces lit by artificial beams, voices echoing Emily's name into the dark, unanswered woods. Then, a discovery rattled everyone. Near a dirt road leading to the lake, deputies noticed faint tire tracks pressed into the soft soil. Though blurred by rain, the imprints suggested a truck had veered off-road, looped back, and sped away. Investigators photographed every inch, planting yellow markers along the muddy path. The possibility was chilling. The green Ford pickup seen in the diner lot might have carried Emily here, to the edge of the lake. For Hayes, the deputy who first took Linda's call, the sight of those tire tracks felt like a stab of reality. Until then, there had been whispers that maybe Emily left by choice, maybe she was hiding out with friends, maybe it was all a misunderstanding. But the tracks in the mud erased illusions. Something deliberate had happened, and the shadow of the lake loomed large over the investigation. The media seized on the story, amplifying every rumor. Local headlines read, "Tracks by Center Hill Lake could be key in disappearance." Radio stations urged anyone with information to come forward. The town buzzed with speculation. Some believed a stranger had abducted Emily, others whispered about jealous ex-boyfriends, and a few suspected a drifter passing through the interstate. Cookeville had never faced a mystery of this scale, and paranoia seeped into every corner. Then came what seemed like a breakthrough. Forensic analysts at the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation announced they had retrieved a male DNA sample from Emily's red jacket, which had been discovered discarded near the roadside days earlier. The announcement spread like wildfire. DNA had spoken, and a suspect had emerged. His name was James "Jimmy" Dalton, a 32-year-old man with prior arrests for assault and theft in Rutherford County. His record made him an easy villain in the public's eyes. When Dalton's mugshot appeared on TV screens, Cookeville erupted in whispers. Neighbors pointed at the photo in newspapers, saying, "That must be him." On social media, his face was plastered with captions labeling him a monster. For a community drowning in uncertainty, the idea of a tangible suspect was like a lifeline. Finally, there was a face to attach to the fear. Linda Walker dared to feel relief for the first time in days. She clutched Emily's photo, telling relatives, "Maybe this is it. Maybe we'll finally know what happened." Search volunteers nodded, energized by the news, believing their endless hours in the woods might soon lead to justice. But hope, cruelly, was short-lived. Investigators quickly uncovered an unshakable alibi. On the very night Emily vanished, Dalton had been in custody at a local jail after a bar fight. Records were airtight. Booking logs, officer reports, even security footage from the holding cell. He couldn't have been anywhere near Cookeville. The DNA on Emily's jacket, experts explained, was likely secondary transfer, maybe from a laundromat, maybe from sitting near each other in a public space weeks earlier. The connection was coincidental, not criminal. When the news broke, the effect was devastating. The community that had rallied in hope now sagged under the weight of disappointment. Headlines flipped overnight. Prime suspect cleared. Social media, once ablaze with accusations, fell into confused silence. Parents who had reassured their children that justice was near were left without answers. Linda collapsed into tears, feeling the rug pulled out from under her fragile hope. And for Hayes, the veteran deputy, it was a professional nightmare. He had seen families buoyed by false hope before, but rarely had he felt the sting so deeply. He stared at the whiteboard in the sheriff's office, crowded with maps, notes, and photos, and muttered to himself, "Back to square one." 8. Psychologically, this collapse of certainty hit harder than the initial fear. Communities can endure tragedy when there is progress, when there are suspects, when there are paths forward. But to be told, "This is the man," and then have that truth unravel overnight, it crushed faith in the system. Volunteers began skipping search shifts. Students whispered cynically in dorms that maybe Emily would never be found. Even the media, once relentless, grew quieter, unsure how to report a story with no direction. How would you feel if the one lead you clung to collapsed overnight? Would you keep believing the investigation could still find answers? Or would you give in to despair, convincing yourself that the truth had slipped away forever? Linda, however, refused to stop. Despite the collapse of the Dalton lead, she continued to attend every briefing, clutching Emily's photo like a talisman. She wrote open letters to the local newspaper, pleading for anyone with information to come forward. Her words were gentle but desperate. "If you know something, please don't stay silent." Neighbors wept reading them, yet many admitted in private that hope was dimming. The sheriff's office kept the search alive, expanding into new sectors of forest, deploying sonar across the lake's murky depths, but without a clear suspect. The effort felt aimless. Reporters began describing it as a puzzle with missing pieces, a phrase that stuck in the public consciousness. The psychological toll grew heavier. Every parent in Cookeville began imagining their own child in Emily's place. College students who once walked confidently across campus now avoided empty parking lots. Even the diner where Emily worked saw fewer customers at night. Fear had reshaped daily life. And yet, the cruelest blow was the realization that even science could mislead. The DNA match, once hailed as irrefutable proof, had proven hollow. It was a stark reminder that evidence, without context, could deceive as much as it revealed. In the sheriff's office, Hayes stared at the growing file on his desk. Witness statements, muddy tire track photos, the red jacket, the blurred security footage, all pieces of a puzzle that refused to lock together. He felt the weight of Linda's gaze every time she asked, "What's next?" And he had no answer. For the first time, whispers of failure crept into official circles. Some deputies quietly admitted that, without new leads, the case might go cold. That phrase, "go cold," landed like a stone in Hayes' stomach. He had fought for 30 years to avoid those words, but as the days turned into weeks, the silence grew unbearable. This was the point where the tragedy of Emily's disappearance transcended the crime itself. It became a story of human fragility, of hope raised and dashed, of trust in science bruised by cruel timing. The community that had once been united now fractured, some clinging to belief, others retreating into resignation. And in that fracture lay the most haunting truth. Every wrong turn didn't just delay justice. It deepened the wound. The Dalton misstep was not just an investigative error. It was a misstep that nearly doomed these cold case files to silence. By the time autumn leaves fell across Cookeville in late 2011, the furious storm of search parties, flashing patrol lights, and frantic press conferences had begun to fade. At first, the town refused to let go. Every weekend brought new volunteers combing the woods, students stapling fresh flyers to poles, neighbors bringing casseroles to Linda Walker's kitchen. But as weeks stretched into months with no breakthrough, reality began to settle like a cold fog. The case was stalling. The tracks had washed away, the DNA lead had collapsed, and the woods surrounding Center Hill Lake grew silent once more. For Linda Walker, silence was unbearable. She refused to allow Emily's name to vanish from memory. In December, only 3 months after her daughter disappeared, she wrote her first open letter to the Cookeville Herald-Citizen. Printed in the Sunday edition, it began softly. "Dear Emmy, the apple tree in the yard has lost its leaves, and the wind whistles through the branches like it knows you are missing. If you can hear me, please know we are waiting. If anyone knows where my daughter is, I beg you, do not stay silent." Eights. The words reached beyond Cookeville. Regional papers reprinted the letter, and strangers from across Tennessee mailed Linda sympathy cards. But inside Cookeville, the letter struck like a bell in a cathedral, clear, aching, impossible to ignore. For weeks, townspeople taped clippings of Linda's words to church bulletin boards and campus dorm doors. It became part prayer, part plea, part reminder. The sheriff's office still kept the investigation alive, but resources thinned. Other cases demanded attention, and the unsolved disappearance of a 19-year-old, tragic though it was, slipped lower on the priority list. By spring 2012, the Walker case had officially transferred to Tennessee's cold case unit. For investigators, that meant fewer active searches, more filing cabinets. For Linda, it meant her nightmare was just beginning. Every month, without fail, Linda wrote another letter. Some were printed in local papers, Others posted to the Bring Emily Home Facebook page started by Emily's cousins. Each letter painted an image of daily life without Emily. The family cat still curling up on her bed, the yard's flowers blooming without her to pick them, the silence in the kitchen where her laughter once rang. Linda signed each letter with a ritual phrase: "If anyone knows something, please don't stay silent." 8. By the second year, these letters became a ritual the community expected. Candlelight vigils outside Tennessee Tech's gates marked each anniversary of Emily's disappearance. Students gathered with glowing candles, voices trembling as they recited her name into the autumn wind. For newcomers to the campus, it became a story passed down. That's for the girl who vanished from the diner. For longtime residents, it was a wound reopened each September, a reminder that evil had walked among them and left without a trace. Yet, as years passed, the unity began to fracture. The longer justice remained out of reach, the more speculation grew, whispered in diners, coffee shops, and church pews. Some insisted Emily's ex-boyfriend, Daniel Brooks, knew more than he revealed. He had, after all, received a cryptic text from Emily. "If something happens, don't trust anyone." People wondered if jealousy or lingering tension played a role. Daniel denied involvement, but suspicion clung like a shadow. Others focused on the mysterious green Ford pickup. A truck so common in Tennessee it could belong to half the county, but so specific in eyewitness memory that it refused to vanish from conversations. Rumors claimed a local mechanic had owned one and sold it weeks after Emily disappeared. Another rumor pointed at a reclusive farmer who drove the same model. Each theory flared like a match, then died in the wind when checked against evidence. Still, the whispers never ceased. In Cookeville, paranoia became part of daily life. College students avoided parking lots at night, glancing over their shoulders whenever headlights lingered too long. Mothers warned daughters not to walk alone, their voices trembling with fear they couldn't fully explain. Even church sermons occasionally referenced Emily, urging the congregation to trust God's timing but remain vigilant against unseen darkness. The psychological torment was not limited to the Walker family. It seeped into the fabric of the entire community. Uncertainty is a crueler weight than grief. Grief, at least, acknowledges a loss. Uncertainty traps families and towns in an endless loop of what-ifs and maybes. Every phone call might be a tip. Every shadowed figure in a parking lot might be the one who knew what happened. Every rustle in the woods near the lake might hide a clue long overlooked. For Linda, the torment manifested in sleepless nights. She often sat at the kitchen table staring at Emily's high school graduation photo, the smile frozen in time. She replayed the night in her mind over and over. Her daughter stepping out of the diner, the headlights flaring, the phone ping along I-40. Each replay ended the same way, in silence. She told friends it was like watching a movie that cuts to black before the ending, leaving her trapped in the dark theater, waiting for credits that never rolled. The community shared this torment in its own way. For years, every rain-soaked evening in Cookeville carried an eerie echo of the night Emily vanished. Students admitted they avoided walking past the diner's lot when the drizzle fell, claiming the air felt heavier there, as if the shadows themselves remembered. Parents confessed to checking their children's rooms twice at night, irrationally fearing the same invisible hand might strike again. The paranoia deepened because the killer had never been caught. It meant he or she could still be among them. Sitting in the pew at church, standing in line at the grocery store, even volunteering at the very vigils meant to honor Emily. That possibility gnawed at trust, corroding the bonds that once tied the town together. Psychologists later described this period as a classic example of community trauma. When tragedy strikes without closure, the human mind seeks explanations, even false ones, to regain control. Rumors about the ex-boyfriend or the green pickup weren't just gossip. They were survival mechanisms, attempts to impose order on chaos. But instead of healing, they sowed division. Families argued over theories. Friends accused each other of hiding information. Trust dissolved into suspicion. Meanwhile, Linda's monthly letters grew heavier. At first, they brimmed with hope. "Emmy, I believe you'll come home. We'll sit under the apple tree again." By the 5th year, they carried exhaustion. "Emmy, I don't know if you can hear me, but I can't stop writing. It's all I have left." By the 8th year, they revealed despair. "Emmy, the seasons change, but nothing else does. Please, someone, anyone, tell us where she is." 8. Each letter was a thread, keeping Emily tethered to the town's memory. Without them, her name might have faded entirely into whispers of cautionary tales. But with them, the town could never truly forget. For the Walker family, the torment of waiting became a second existence. They lived ordinary days, grocery shopping, paying bills, mowing lawns under the shadow of extraordinary loss. Holidays passed with one chair empty. Birthdays arrived without candles for Emily. At family reunions, her absence was a wound no one dared to probe too deeply. Years blurred. By 2015, 4 years had passed. By 2018, 7. Cookeville had grown, new businesses, new students, new faces, but the wound lingered beneath the surface. Freshman at Tennessee, Tech heard Emily's story like an urban legend, told by upperclassmen as a warning. Don't walk alone at night. Remember what happened to Emily Walker. Her name had become both a memory and a myth. For investigators, the case file gathered dust in the cold case unit. Each time Linda called for updates, the response was the same. We're still monitoring, but nothing new. It was the cruel rhythm of cold cases, waiting for technology to advance, waiting for confessions, waiting for miracles. In the meantime, families carried the weight alone. And yet, through it all, Linda clung to ritual. Each September 14th, she organized a candlelight vigil outside Tennessee Tech's gates. Students, faculty, and townspeople gathered, holding candles against the autumn wind, whispering Emily's name. Some cried openly, others stood in silence, but all knew the vigil was as much for themselves as it was for Emily. A way to release the suffocating tension of a decade with no answers. Psychologically, the vigil served as a lifeline. They reminded the community they weren't alone in their fear and grief. They gave Linda a platform to speak, to remind everyone her daughter wasn't just a missing file in a cabinet. She was a girl who loved cats, studied hard, and once dreamed of becoming a teacher. Still, the torment of waiting took its toll. Cookeville was no longer the carefree town it had been in 2011. Its sidewalks carried shadows. Its college nights ended earlier. Its people looked at each other with warier eyes. The case hadn't just stolen Emily, it had stolen the town's innocence. As the 10th anniversary approached in 2021, the question hung heavy in every conversation. Would they ever know the truth? Would you still hold on after a decade of silence? If you believe no cold case files should be forgotten, hit subscribe, because what happens next proves that silence doesn't mean the story is over. For 9 long years, the forest near Center Hill Lake held their silence, cloaking the truth under leaves, rain, and shadows. But in March of 2020, that silence was shattered. On a cool morning, 3 hunters wandered into a thicket nearly 10 miles from the diner where Emily was last seen. They moved along forgotten trails, boots crunching on dry leaves, when one suddenly stopped. Under the brush, Something pale protruded from the earth. At first glance, they thought it was animal bone. But a closer look revealed the rounded curve of a human skull, weathered but unmistakable. The forest seemed to hold its breath. The hunters called authorities, and within an hour, yellow police tape sealed off the area. Deputies from Putnam County arrived, their radios crackling as forensics teams carefully combed the scene. Scattered bone fragments lay half-buried under moss, alongside a faded red Converse shoe and a small silver bracelet engraved with 3 simple letters. E. G. W. Emily Grace Walker. When investigators brought that bracelet photo to Linda Walker, she broke down in tears. No DNA test was needed. Every mother knows her child's belongings. After nearly a decade of torment, Emily had been found, but not alive, only as fragments left in the soil. For Cookeville, which had slowly buried the case under whispers and resignation, the discovery tore open an old wound. Headlines erupted. Remains of missing Tennessee student found. Television cameras panned over police vehicles crammed along the forest road, neighbors standing in shock behind the tape. The forensic team collected the bones with painstaking care. They were placed in sterile bags and driven to the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation's lab in Nashville. There, under cold fluorescent lights, Dr. Eleanor Price, a veteran forensic pathologist, examined the skull. She noted fractures stretching from temple to the back of the head, evidence of blunt force trauma. The neck vertebrae showed deep grooves consistent with strangulation by rope or cord. Price spoke quietly to her team. This was no accident in the woods. This young woman was murdered. Eights. At last, the speculation ended. Emily hadn't wandered off or succumbed to the wilderness. She had been deliberately silenced. For Linda, the word homicide brought both clarity and agony. The truth answered one question, but opened 1,000 more. Who did this? Why? And how had he evaded justice for 9 years? The red jacket found years earlier was also retested with advanced technology. Under high-resolution microscopes, analysts discovered tiny nylon fibers clinging to the fabric. It matched the same type of cord fibers found near Emily's ribcage at the discovery site. Alongside it was another critical element: male DNA. It didn't match anyone in CODIS, the national database, but it proved a man had strangled Emily and discarded her body in the woods. For investigators, this was a turning point. In 2020, forensic genealogy had begun to change the landscape of cold cases nationwide. Detectives could now upload unidentified DNA into genealogical databases, searching not for the killer directly, but for distant relatives who might reveal a family tree. Detective Laura Mitchell, newly assigned to the cold case unit, seized on this opportunity. "This case isn't dead," she told her team. "We need to look again with 2021 eyes, not 2011. Eights. Mitchell submitted the degraded male DNA for whole genome sequencing. Weeks later, the results arrived. A partial match to a distant cousin in Cumberland County, Tennessee. It was a small thread, but in genealogy, even a thread can unravel a hidden life. Genealogists traced records, births, and marriages until one name emerged: David Ross. Ross, 45 years old, lived less than 2 miles from Emily's home. He was a carpenter, a familiar face around town. Records showed that in 2011, he had owned a 1998 green Ford pickup, the very type multiple witnesses had described. Former co-workers from the diner recalled Ross drinking black coffee at the counter, eyes lingering too long on the young waitresses. One admitted Emily once told her, "That man makes me uncomfortable." Eights. Mitchell's stomach turned when she saw old photographs. Ross had even joined the 2011 search party, flashlight in hand, combing through fields beside Emily's friends and classmates. There he was in local newspaper clippings, standing just feet from Linda Walker, consoling her, pretending to be part of the hunt. And here's where the second-person lens hits hardest. Can you imagine shaking hands with a neighbor, never knowing he once buried a secret in the woods? Ross had played both roles, predator and hero. While Emily's family pleaded for answers, he smiled politely, handed out flyers, and diverted suspicion. To the town, he was a kind handyman. In reality, he was the man who silenced a 19-year-old and left her bones hidden for nearly a decade. Surveillance was launched quietly. Officers collected his discarded beer cans and cigarette butts, sending them to the lab. The results confirmed what genealogy had suggested. Ross's DNA was a full match to the male DNA found on Emily's red jacket and the nylon cord. Statistically, the chance of another person sharing this profile was less than 1 in a billion. Modern technology had finally done what years of speculation and rumor could not. Modern forensics breathed life back into these cold case files. When detectives presented the evidence to the Putnam County prosecutor, the decision was immediate. Request an arrest warrant. On July the 17th, 2021, SWAT trucks rolled into Ross's quiet street before dawn. Neighbors woke to sirens, red and blue lights flashing against the misty Tennessee sky. A booming loudspeaker called out, "David Ross, come out with your hands raised." Within minutes, the man who once searched for Emily stepped onto his porch in pajamas, his hands trembling in the air. The community gasped. An elderly neighbor whispered, "He fixed my roof last summer." A former classmate muttered, "He handed me flyers back in 2011. Betrayal rippled through Cookeville like an earthquake. For years, Ross had been a shadow hiding in plain sight. The psychological weight of this revelation was staggering. How could someone live a double life so convincingly? Psychologists who later analyzed Ross's behavior noted the hallmarks of a predator who thrives on control and concealment. He inserted himself into the search not out of guilt, but as a calculated move to watch, to mislead, and to savor his secret power. For him, blending into the grieving community was the ultimate camouflage. And this raises a haunting thought for viewers. If someone capable of murder can so easily disguise themselves as a helpful neighbor, how safe do we really feel in our own towns? The FBI CAST team added the final nail. They reanalyzed Emily's 2011 phone data using modern mapping. On a large digital screen, her last movements appeared as a red line. Leaving the diner, merging onto I-40, then heading straight towards Center Hill Lake, ending precisely where her remains were found 9 years later. Along that path, the signal passed Ross's own neighborhood. It aligned perfectly with the taxi driver's report of a green pickup speeding toward the lake that night. Every scattered clue now connected. The eyewitness at the diner, the traffic camera, the tire tracks, the DNA, and the phone's final journey. They no longer pointed in circles of doubt. They all pointed to David Ross. As the public learned these details, Cookeville was torn between relief and horror. Relief that justice was closer. Horror that, for nearly a decade, the killer had attended church services, fixed porches, waved at neighbors, and even volunteered for the very search meant to find his victim. For Linda Walker, the news was bittersweet. She could finally attach a name and face to her daughter's killer. Yet the betrayal cut deeper than she could have imagined. She later told reporters, "He was standing right there with us, looking me in the eye, pretending to help. All along, he knew." 8. The trial would come later, but in those crucial months of 2020 and 2021, Cookeville learned a painful truth. Justice may sleep, but it never dies. Advances in forensics, the persistence of investigators, and the power of community memory had finally pulled Emily's story from the shadows. And if you're watching, remember, what solved this case wasn't luck. It was persistence. Naum, it was science. It was the refusal to let a young woman's name fade into whispers. And that's why stories like Emily's, preserved in these cold case files, matter more than ever. The DNA from Ross's discarded beer cans and cigarette butts came back as a full match. Investigators stared at the report in stunned silence, the probability of error less than 1 in a billion. The man they had once trusted to hold a flashlight in the search for Emily was now revealed as her killer. Detective Laura Mitchell placed the lab report on the board beside Emily's smiling photo and the yellowed flyers from 2011. A red pin connected them all: the jacket, the cord, the map of Emily's final phone pings, and now the definitive DNA. She turned to her team. "We have enough. It's time." 8. July 17th, 2021. At dawn, armored vehicles crept into Ross's quiet neighborhood. Mist clung to the street as if even nature was reluctant to witness what was about to happen. SWAT officers surrounded the small wooden house, rifles raised, while neighbors peeked from behind curtains. The loudspeaker cut through the fog. "David Ross, come out immediately with your hands raised." 8. Ross appeared in worn pajamas, his face pale, hands trembling in the dawn light. In an instant, the quiet carpenter, the man who had once fixed roofs, handed out flyers, and prayed in church pews, was in handcuffs. Cameras flashed as he was escorted to a waiting van. Neighbors whispered, "He searched with us. He cried with us." The betrayal was almost too heavy to process. And here's where the story pulls you in. Can you imagine sitting at church beside a man you thought you knew, only to discover a decade later he was hiding a body in the woods? The arrest sent shockwaves through Cookeville. Headlines blared: "Cold case solved, volunteer turned killer." Students from Tennessee Tech posted disbelief across social media. Some recalled Ross handing them water during search parties. Parents shuddered at the thought that their children had been so close to a predator masquerading as a helper. Inside the interrogation room, Ross stayed silent. When presented with the DNA report, he muttered, "I gave her a ride, nothing more." But the silence that followed was louder than any denial. Prosecutors weren't relying on words. They had science, timelines, and an undeniable web of connections. Preparation for trial began immediately. The prosecutor's office stacked over 600 pages of evidence on long tables. Forensic genealogy reports, FBI cast phone mapping, eyewitness testimony, crime scene photographs, and lab results linking Ross's DNA to Emily's clothing. They built the case piece by piece, ensuring no gap could be exploited by the defense. Key witnesses were identified. 8. The diner regular who saw Emily standing by a green pickup the night she vanished. The taxi driver who remembered the truck barreling towards Center Hill Lake in the rain. Emily's co-worker who recalled her saying Ross made her uncomfortable. Experts in DNA, genealogy, and digital mapping ready to explain how modern science resurrected the case. The psychological weight of this preparation was immense. Jurors would be asked not just to review evidence, but to measure betrayal. How do you weigh the guilt of a man who didn't merely kill, but deceived his entire community? He joined the search for his own victim, laughed with neighbors, and lived undetected for nearly a decade. That betrayal was more than criminal. It was moral corrosion, the theft of trust. And as you sit with this, picture yourself in the jury box. Would you feel the weight of convicting a man your town once called a friend, knowing his guilt could mean life in prison, but his silence leaves small shadows of doubt? That is the moral burden every juror would carry. In the days following Ross's arrest, Cookeville became a storm of conflicting emotions. Relief that Emily's killer was caught clashed with grief that he had been one of their own. Parents whispered warnings to their children. At coffee shops, people stared at the empty chair where Ross once sat, sipping black coffee and nodding to waitresses. The ordinariness of his presence was what made the crime so chilling. Detective Mitchell understood the trial would be brutal. The defense would argue DNA only proved contact, not murder. They would remind the jury no one witnessed the act itself. But Mitchell knew the prosecution had more. A digital trail of Emily's final journey, forensic evidence of strangulation, and testimony showing Ross's disturbing fixation on her. The case wasn't just about science, it was about building a story so airtight that no shadow of doubt could creep through. In preparation meetings, the prosecutor tapped the thick folder. This is more than data. This is a decade of silence broken by truth. We have to make the jury feel Emily's presence in this courtroom. 8. Meanwhile, Linda Walker attended every briefing, clutching her daughter's framed photo. She had waited 10 years for this moment, not revenge, but recognition. She once said, "I don't care if he confesses. I just want Emily heard." Her words became the emotional backbone of the case. The betrayal of trust became a theme woven through every angle. The prosecution highlighted Ross's deception as the ultimate cruelty, not only taking Emily's life, but standing beside her grieving family, pretending to care. Psychologists later explained this behavior as a classic predatory camouflage, where offenders seek control not just over victims, but over entire communities. Ross wasn't satisfied with murder. He needed to manipulate grief itself. Community members felt complicit. Some wondered if they had missed signs, the long stares at the diner, the eagerness to join the search, the quiet man who always seemed to know too much. That paranoia spread like wildfire. If Ross could hide among them, who else might be hiding something? Cookeville learned a hard truth. Evil often wears the mask of normalcy. The trial was scheduled for early 2022. As January approached, the courthouse prepared for national media. News vans lined the street. Reporters rehearsed lines about the betrayal of trust case. Inside, prosecutors rehearsed witness testimony, while defense attorneys sharpened arguments about reasonable doubt. And here's the pivotal moment for viewers. This is where the fight for justice inside cold case files reaches its breaking point. Don't look away. For Cookeville, the trial wasn't just about convicting a man. It was about reclaiming faith in justice, proving that persistence in science could overcome even a decade of silence. For Linda, it was about closing the circle that began on a rainy night in 2011. For the jury, it would be about looking into the face of a man once hailed as a neighbor and deciding whether he was guilty beyond all doubt. The stage was set. The searchlight that Ross once held was now turned on him, exposing every shadow he had hidden in. And as the community braced for the trial, one truth echoed louder than ever. Emily's voice, silenced for 10 years, was finally speaking again through the weight of evidence, through the persistence of investigators, and through the courage of a mother who never stopped writing letters into the void. January 3rd, 2022. The courthouse in Putnam County became the center of Tennessee's attention. News vans lined the street, their satellite dishes pointed at gray skies. Inside, every wooden bench was filled, reporters scribbled furiously, and the jury of 12 ordinary citizens prepared to carry the heaviest burden of their lives. David Ross entered in an orange jumpsuit, his expression blank, eyes cast toward the floor. He didn't look at Linda Walker in the front row, clutching her daughter's framed photo. The chief prosecutor stood tall and began the case. This is not a story of coincidence. This is a story of evidence, persistence, and betrayal. 8. Witnesses took the stand one by one. A diner coworker testified that Emily had once said Ross made her uncomfortable, that he lingered at the counter, eyes fixed on her, and once smirked when she refused his request for her number. The jury scribbled notes, some glancing at Ross as if seeing a predator beneath his quiet mask. Next came the taxi driver. He recalled that stormy night, seeing a green Ford pickup swerving recklessly toward Center Hill Lake. He remembered it because the roads were slick with rain, and the truck nearly collided with his cab. His testimony matched the time of Emily's final phone ping. Then came the most unsettling witness, a former search volunteer. He remembered Ross insisting they comb residential streets instead of the lake area, leading the group in circles for hours. "At the time, I thought he was just lost," he said, his voice unsteady. "But now, it feels like he was buying himself time." 8. Science soon followed emotion. DNA experts explained the process. Samples from the red jacket and nylon cord tested against Ross's discarded cigarette butts and beer cans. "The result is a complete match," the expert stated firmly. "The odds of another person having this genetic profile are 1 in a billion." A genealogy specialist presented the family tree that narrowed hundreds of distant relatives down to Ross alone. On the large courtroom screen, a red line traced branches of ancestry until it ended squarely at his name. The FBI cast team took the stand next. They displayed a glowing map of Cookeville, Emily's phone pings forming a red path from the diner to Center Hill Lake. "This is the final journey of Emily Grace Walker," the agent said. "It passes through Ross's own neighborhood before ending near the forest where her remains were found." 8. And here's where the second-person voice presses in. If you were on that jury, could you ignore Emily's last words, her text warning not to trust anyone, and the map of her final journey pointing straight to the man seated before you? The defense tried to fight back. They argued DNA only proved contact, not murder. They claimed eyewitnesses' memories had faded after a decade. They reminded the jury no one had seen Ross commit the act. But each time, the prosecution returned to the evidence board. DNA on the jacket and cord, the green pickup on camera, the map of her phone's path, and witnesses who remembered Emily's unease. Piece by piece, the story formed a wall the defense could not breach. Closing arguments burned with emotion. The prosecutor addressed the jury directly. David Ross didn't just murder a young woman. He deceived this community. He joined the search, handed out flyers, and stood beside her grieving mother while hiding the truth. Justice has waited 10 years. Do not let it wait another day. 8. The jury deliberated for hours. The courtroom hushed in tense silence. Linda Walker sat unmoving, clutching Emily's photo, her knuckles white. Finally, the door opened. The foreperson stood. "On the charge of first-degree murder, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of kidnapping, guilty." 8. The words struck like thunder. Gasps and sobs rippled through the room. Linda collapsed into her son's arms, whispering, "Justice, Emmy, justice." The judge's voice followed firmly. "David Ross, you are sentenced to life in prison without parole." 8. Ross sat still, jaw clenched, eyes empty, as deputies led him away in cuffs. The community that once embraced him as a volunteer now stared at him as a murderer unmasked. For Cookeville, the verdict was more than punishment. It was restoration, proof that persistence, science, and community memory could conquer silence. For Linda Walker, it was the end of a nightmare, though not the end of grief. Emily's light was gone, but her voice had spoken again through evidence, witnesses, and the truth finally unveiled. When the gavel fell and David Ross was sentenced to life without parole, Cookeville exhaled after a decade of holding its breath. Yet justice, while necessary, could not erase the ache. At the Jefferson Avenue diner, co-workers still glanced at the empty counter where Emily once laughed during late shifts. On Tennessee Tech's campus, professors paused when her name appeared on old rosters. The absence was everywhere. But from grief grew resolve. Weeks after the trial, Linda Walker announced the creation of Emily's Light Scholarship, dedicated to helping criminal justice students at Tennessee Tech. "I want Emily's light to guide others in the pursuit of justice," she said through tears, her daughter's graduation photo framed beside rows of white candles. Each year, students apply not just with transcripts, but with essays on what justice means when silence stretches for years. The community, too, carried lessons forward. Candlelight vigils outside the university gates continued, no longer only mourning, but standing as a promise that no voice would vanish unnoticed again. Parents reminded their children to trust their instincts in parking lots, to call home even after short drives. Friends looked twice at familiar faces, realizing that danger sometimes wears a neighbor's smile. Emily's case became a teaching tool, shared in workshops and classrooms. Investigators noted how persistence and forensic genealogy turned despair into progress. For the people of Cookeville, the story was no longer just about loss, but about resilience. And so, Emily Grace Walker's legacy endures, not only in the courtroom, but in every reminder that cold case files don't die. They wait for someone to listen. If you believe every cold case file deserves a voice, subscribe and share Emily's story. Justice delayed is not justice denied.